Dr. Simon Estes is an internationally renowned opera singer who has sung in 90 of the major opera houses with 115 orchestras, 102 operatic roles with over 90 different conductors all around the world. Mr. Estes has sung for over 29 presidents throughout the world, including 6 presidents in the United States. Notable religious figures for whom Estes has sung are 2 popes, the Billy Graham Crusade in Madison Square Garden, Archbishop Desmond Tutu at St. George Cathedral in Cape Town, South Africa, and various church denominations around the world. Simon Estes believes and feels deeply humbled to have sung for Nelson Mandela many times and fortunate enough to have heard Dr. Martin Luther King speak in person. Dr. Estes is the only person in history to have sung for both the 25th and 50th anniversary of the United Nations in San Francisco and New York City, respectively. Mr. Estes' heart and career has led him to help thousands of children around the world in various needs, and in the past year has had a focus on raising funds to eradicate malaria in Africa to save children's lives. He has established foundations in Zurich, Switzerland, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, as well as Iowa, in order to meet children's needs for education and health concerns. Professor Estes continues to teach at Iowa State University and Wartburg College and continues his Roots and Wings concert tour for all of Iowa's 99 counties, of which he has already been in concert for 37 counties.
Actually, it's 60 now.
It's 60 now. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Fantastic. Mr. Estes donates half of his tour fee towards scholarships to high school students for their college education. Simon Estes has a profound faith in his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Dr. Estes has the expressed desire to love, serve, and follow Jesus in all ways for the remainder of his life. Ladies and gentlemen, Shared Voices, Denise Grace Foundation, let's please welcome Dr. Simon Estes.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. God bless all of you. I'm honored to be here.
Absolutely. So you have had such a thrilling and amazing career, and we want to know all about it. So why don't we start at the very beginning? Can you please tell us about how you started to sing and where you grew up?
I grew up in Centerville, Iowa. It's a little town. It was a coal mining town when I was born. And a lot of people came from all over the world. We had 3 coal mines, and so attracted a number of black people that came there to work in the coal mines. We were very, very poor. I was born in a little house in Centerville that's 27 feet by 25 feet. We had no running water, no electricity. And that little house housed 6 people, my mother, my earthly father, and my 3 older sisters. My mother had an incredible voice. Had she not been born in 1910, she would have sung at the Metropolitan Opera. That's the great voice that my mother had. My father was a very quiet man. He couldn't read or write. His father, my grandfather, was a slave, sold for $500. I have the documentation to prove his age. He was born in 1837, and my grandmother was born in 1840. We, as I said, economically speaking, we were really, really, really poor. I don't think my daddy ever brought home a check for more than $18 a week and raised that money to he worked, had that amount of money to take care of his family. We were deeply spiritual and Christian people. And for example, today I give all of the praise and glory to God and his son, Jesus Christ, for the career that I have. Centerville was a discriminating town like all towns were. Black people, we were called colored in those days, of course. We couldn't swim in the swimming pool with white people, but eventually they would let us swim on Sunday morning, I mean Saturday mornings from 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. And then the colored kids had to get out of the pool, and then they would put more disinfectant in the water. We couldn't eat in certain restaurants in Centerville, Iowa, but my parents taught my sisters and me that we must never hate white people. We must pray for them. We must not let hatred enter our hearts. And I remember there was a bishop who was a bishop of the Midwestern part of the United States of a Methodist church. And this bishop invited me to lunch many years ago when I was teaching at the university, Iowa State University, and I still am. He said, "Why don't you have hatred in your heart because of the discrimination that you've experienced?" And I said, "I don't have any room for hate. My heart is full of love." And my parents have taught me humility. And Centerville was a town of about 8,000 people then, but now it's about 5,000 because the coal mines stopped producing. The schools were good, but there were prejudice there also. And I didn't realize in third grade, Ellen Clark, who was the principal of the elementary school, that means grades 1 through 6, kindergarten through 6, when we had music, the colored kids had to sit in the back of the class, the back of the room. So when they had music, she would call me, and I was the only colored person in my class. So she'd say, "Oh, Simon, you come up here to the front." So when they had the music and the singing, I was in the front, and after that, then she would send me back to the back of the room. But through all of those things, I didn't realize way back there then, and that lady, Ellen Clark, didn't know that Simon Estes had an opera voice, and I didn't either, didn't even know what opera was. But obviously, there was something special there. And she heard that. So when I was in third grade, that was the first time that I recognized that I had a special voice, but I didn't understand that, of course, in third grade. And then when I was in junior high, that's seventh and eighth grade, middle school, the high school teacher asked me, the principal of the middle school, if I could come sing in the high school choir. That had never been done. And so he said yes. And the high school and the junior high school were right across the street from each other. So I went over, but I sang first soprano with the girls. I had a high C. I really did. And when I remember, I sang Sweet Little Jesus Boy for the class, and the lady there, one of the mothers was there, and her name was Mrs. Poffenberger. And when I finished singing, she was crying. And I said, "Oh, Mrs. Poffenberger, I'm so sorry I made you cry." She said, "No, Simon." She said, "They weren't sad tears, they were happy tears." Now, obviously, God had something in my voice then that touched this lady's heart. And then later on, when I went to the University of Iowa in the mid 1950s, I wanted to sing in the university choir, the major choir, with like 200 voices. And I went to Mr. Stark, who was the head of the voice department. I said, "Could I sing in the choir?" He said, "No, no, no, your voice isn't good enough." I said, "Oh, well, you're the head of the voice department. Could I take voice lessons with you?" He said, "No, no, no, you have no talent. I wouldn't waste my time with you. However," he said, "there's a young teacher coming here this fall. Maybe he'll take you." And that man was Charles Kellis. He was 34 years old when he came to the University of Iowa. And when he heard me sing, he said, "You know, you have a voice to sing opera." And I said, "What's opera?" I didn't know what it was. But all along, God had arranged all of that. Before I was born, in elementary school, junior high school, university, etc., God had arranged all of it. And so that led me up to Mr. Kellis, and he worked with me, and then he sent me to Juilliard School of Music. Went to Juilliard, where, of course, Denise is teaching there, and I have taught there too. And then my career took off professionally. April 19th, 1965, I made my debut at the Deutsche Oper in West Berlin in the role of Ramphus in Aida.
So that's interesting. And thank you so much for sharing all of that. So you made your debut overseas and not in America. Can you tell us a little bit more about why that was?
Yes. Well, I met a girlfriend when I was at Juilliard, and she graduated in 1964 and went to Germany to try to sing for a manager to try to get a job in opera houses. And I wanted to see her at Christmas time, but I had no money, of course. So I went to the NAACP in New York. This is how naive I was. I went to the NAACP, this big building in New York, and Roy Wilkins was the head of the NAACP at that time. And I said, I need some money to go to Europe to sing. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Because I just walked down and walked in the office. Receptionist was there. I said, I need some money to go to Europe. And she said, well, we don't have funds for something like that. I said, well, I'm a student at Juilliard. She said, you're what? I said, I'm a student at Juilliard. Oh, then her whole countenance changed. She said, well, I'll let you go talk to someone, but I'm sure we don't have it. So I went into an office. I spoke to this individual, and and they said too, we don't have money to send to somebody to go to Europe to audition. She said, but the way you presented yourself, the NACP, we are going to take up a collection for you in the office here. They collected $287. Then they said, go to the New York City Community Trust Fund, tell them we sent you there and ask them for more money, which I did. So I went over and I auditioned for this manager. Basically was going over there to see my girlfriend, of course, but I didn't tell them this. And so he liked me, my voice. And he said, could you wait? Because it was in December of 1964. And I want to send you to the Berlin after the first of the year, meaning 1965. So I stayed. I went to the Deutsche Oper, sang, and I was still a student at Juilliard. And they offered me a job to sing at the opera house there. A lot transpired between the words and that time, but rather. But nonetheless, I went there and I sang Romfus as I said, April 19th, 1965. I made my debut in opera.
Wonderful. So thinking about the early days of your career, uh, I've read that your first check was for $500. At
Yes.
the time, you were really excited about getting those $500, but can you tell us what you kind of realized after you got paid and how that felt as a young artist?
I can remember I signed a contract with Columbia Artist Management. That was the main management for opera singers and classical music back in those days. I I sang an audition and they gave me a position. They said, we'd like to have you be on our roster. And so Michael Reese, who was the vice president of Columbia Artist Management at that time, he obviously heard my voice, and so he managed me. So that first year that I was with Columbia, I had concerts that I got $500. They were just recitals with piano, $500 a concert. And I remember because I was taking care of my mother at that time, and I called my mother and I said, Mother, your worries are over. I said, I'm going to make $25,000 this year singing these performances. Well, I didn't realize that $500, Columbia got 15%. I had to pay my accompanist's ticket, my airplane ticket, my accompanist's fee, hotel expenses. I ended up in debt. And the way I survived, Columbia would always give me advances towards my monthly money that I made for Columbia. And that's the only way I survived. Michael Reese, bless his heart, he died many years ago, but he always gave me an advance because I ended up in debt that first year when I was with Columbia. But then later on, my career took off and then things got to be a little bit better. But I took good care of my mother. My dad had already died. So,
That's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I'd like to talk about your experience singing at the Metropolitan Opera and the significance of your Porgy and Bess production. Denise Graves and myself were a part of the production that came back to the Met in 2019. But long before that, you sang in Porgy and Bess. Can you tell us all about that experience?
Well, what was wonderful about it, and sad on one hand, to think that the Metropolitan Opera had never performed Porgy and Bess, the greatest American opera ever composed. And I remember that the Met contacted me and they said, Simon, we'd like to sing you to sing Porgy. And Grace Bumbry is going to sing Bess. And I said, well, thank you. I will do that. But I told Joan Ingpen was the artistic director way back in the 1980s. And I said, are you going to treat this as a real opera or is it going to be treated as a Broadway musical? And she was British. She said, oh, of course it's going to be an opera. And I said, well, are all of the singers that you hire going to be opera singers in, right? Oh, yes, yes. I said, well, I want you to make sure that you give the singers who are singing in Porgy and Bess some other roles other than just in Porgy and Bess. Now, I still say our greatest opera they ever composed in by an American composer is Porgy and Bess. She was unhappy when I insisted that she hire them as singers singing other than this just in Porgy and Bess, which they ended up doing. So in that respect, I was honored to break that barrier had been going on since 1938. They finally sang Porgy and Bess. And of course, the whole story is about poor Black people, but they were spiritual people because when Serena sings that Greek song, My Man's Gone Now, and then she says later on when Bess gets sick, she said, Porgy, I'm going to pray over her. And you know how that prayer goes in Porgy and Bess. And after she finishes singing that, she said, Porgy, that woman's going to be okay tomorrow by 5 o'clock. She's going to be well. And that showed the spirituality of this role and this opera. No, I think it's one of the greatest operas ever written, Porgy and Bess.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'd love to talk about your career in Europe versus your career in the United States, and what were some of the challenges you had to overcome in order to be successful, not just in Europe, but also in America?
Well, first of all, Germany had 67 opera houses in that country, more than any other country in the world. And I couldn't sing in certain opera houses in the United States way back in the mid 60s. And so I went to Europe when I got that audition to sing in Berlin, and I made my debut there. After I finished that performances, the conductor came back to when I first sang uh, in Berlin in the opera Aida. Giuseppe Patane was the Italian conductor conducting it. He came back afterwards and said, nobody told me that you were a beginner. He said, I would have worked with you, but did you didn't make any mistakes? And I said, well, thank you. Because when I went there, they told me I was going to sing the king when I auditioned. Then when I got there, they said I had to sing Ramphas. So I memorized Ramphas in about 6 days in German and not in Italian and sang Ramphas. And I didn't meet any of the cast before the performance. This is the honest to God truth. They took me to a rehearsal room. First of all, a man named Hilsdorf, who was one of the coaches, taught me the role of Ramphas. I memorized it within those 6 days, sang the performance, never having worked with the conductor, never met Aida or Radames or Omneris. All those colleagues, I met them during the performance, and I was just a student, basically, right still with Juilliard. And that's why I know God was the one who helped me to learn that rule because it had to be done from memory. I didn't know German at that time. To this day, I have to say God either helped me or sang through me because I wasn't nervous and I had a success. And then other opera houses started offering me jobs because in the United States, just was difficult for me.
I'm so glad you just told that story because Elliot, one of our cohort members, just asked that question, wanting to know what was that experience like for with learning that role in just 6 days. Other than praying and relying on your higher power to get you through that experience, how did you learn all of that music?
You know, I didn't realize then that God had given me a talent to have a classical voice. Opera singers are called classical singers. I didn't realize that. And I didn't realize that God had given me a talent to memorize. I could memorize any opera in German, Italian, French, Spanish, Russian in 4 days. I actually have done that. Now, I'm not trying to impress anybody or brag or boast because I give the praise and glory to God. I didn't know I had a talent for languages. I sang in all of those languages that I mentioned to, and I've recorded in those numbers. So God was the one who saw me through all of this because I look back on it now after having been singing all these years. I thought, how did I do it? And I came to a conclusion just about 6 or 7 months ago. I thought either God was singing through me or God was helping me because what I did was not normal. And I'm not, again, I repeat, my mother taught me humility. I don't know how I was able to memorize all of that except realizing God gave me a talent to sing, to memorize, and languages. So I give him the praise and glory.
Thank you so much. And, Valerie has asked a question along these lines, so I'll ask this question now. Her question is, did you face any language barriers when first traveling to Europe? Was there any prejudice in Europe like what you experienced in America?
You know, I did not experience the racial prejudice in Europe that I did in my own country, the United States. And I am just grateful that I had this privilege to go to Europe. They judged me on my quality of my voice and my character and not my skin color, as Martin Luther King said. And I just feel really blessed. Now, there was a few little incidents once in a while. I remember I was singing a recital in Bonn, Germany, and I was singing Schubert. That's one of their favorite composers, you know. And there were some white men there, and they started booing the moment I walked out on the stage, and the people threw them out. But they said they didn't think a black man should be singing German music, especially Franz Schubert and Brahms and Beethoven, all of that. So that was very minimal, though. It really was. When I made my debut in Bayreuth, I remember some of the press said they were going to boo this black man off the stage because they didn't want me singing in Bayreuth. But and so when I auditioned, Wolfgang Wagner heard me sing. He said, Simon, I want you to open the season singing the title role of the Flying Dutchman. This was in 1978 that I made my debut in Bayreuth. And as I said, some people said they would boo me off the stage. Well, they didn't boo me off the stage. And I had a wonderful success. Thank you, Jesus, that everything went well. But that's the Bayreuth story because no black man had ever sung in Bayreuth. But to answer the question directly, I had more discrimination in the United States than I did in Europe. I sang all over Europe.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. And I'm so sorry that you had experiences like that. And thank you for sharing your story with us. Chastity has another question for you. Dr. Estes, have you experienced any wage disparities because of your race throughout time? Do you believe it has gotten better? Do you believe it will ever get better?
Well, it's a little better, but yes, I did experience discrimination in being paid. I remember we were doing in San Francisco La Boheme with Luciano Pavarotti and Mirella Freni. Now, this was back in 1967, and I sang Colina in La Boheme. Those singers were probably being paid way back then, probably six, seven, maybe $10,000 a performance. I was paid $257 a performance. And they told Michael Reese, my manager at Columbia Artists Management, Kurt Adler was the head of the San Francisco Opera. He said, take it or leave it. I had to swallow my pride, but my manager said, Simon, I think you should take it. He said, it's not right, it's not fair, but you need to sing with people like Pavarotti, Mirella Freni. And so I had to take that. I was never paid properly in the United States the fees that I should have been paid because of my skin color. And that same thing did happen in Europe too. They wouldn't pay a black man what they should have paid me. But I had to have a lot of courage and a lot of faith. And again, I compromise, but I don't compromise my faith, my values, my principles, or my morality. Those parts and traits of my character, I don't compromise. But certain things in life, sometimes we have to compromise. So what I had to compromise was to swallow my pride and accept that money that was unjustly paid to me. But if I hadn't done all of that, I would probably wouldn't be talking with you today.
Mm, wow. And you certainly paved the way for many of us. So we thank you so much for your sacrifice all those years ago, Dr. Estes. I am thinking now about the fact that you've sung on so many illustrious stages, even in the political arena, you've sung for many, many presidents. Can you tell us what it was like to sing for presidents?
Well, I feel very blessed. The first president I sang for in the United States was Johnson back in 1966 when I won a bronze medal in Moscow's Tchaikovsky competition. President Johnson invited me to the White House because when they contacted me, I didn't know anything about the Tchaikovsky competition. The State Department called me in Europe to this day. I don't know how. And they said, we'd like you to represent the United States in Moscow's first vocal competition. Before it had just been for piano, like Van Cliburn, when he won it in 1958, and instruments. That was the first year for singers. And so, anyhow, I went there and I sang, and I got the bronze medal. That's when President Johnson. So, from President Johnson up through Barack Obama and Biden, I sang for 7 presidents of the United States. And I've sung for presidents all around the world. And as you and I were talking before, I sang for Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, Billy Graham. I'm not Catholic, but I sang for 2 popes at the Vatican. I've sung for the Nobel Prize Committee. I sang in a concert with Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. I've been so blessed that I have sung all over the world. And you mentioned when you and I were talking before, I've sung and with 115 different orchestras. No other singer has ever done that. I'm not bragging at all. It's a fact. I've sung 104 operas in my life. I've sung with about 100 of the world's greatest conductors. All of that is because God gave me a voice to sing opera. And I had no idea when I was growing up in Centerville, Iowa. I was born in 1938. I had no idea I was going to be an opera singer, but God knew I was going to be.
Wow. So, of all of those memorable opportunities and performances you've done, what would you say is your most memorable performance in your career thus far?
Well, as I say, I've been so blessed. I feel deeply honored that I got to sing for Nelson Mandela when he got out of prison. Um, that man was incarcerated 27 years unjustly because of apartheid. And when he came to the Nobel Prize Committee after he got out of prison, there were people there from other countries and different professions. I mention him because he was a man, when he went into prison, a lot of people didn't know this, he was very angry and very bitter. But while he was in prison, he realized that won't help anger and bitterness. His whole personality and character changed. I have pictures of myself. I feel honored with Nelson Mandela. When he came out of prison, he said, and when he realized he was going to be president of South Africa, he said, I'm going to be president of all the people. I feel I didn't sing for Martin Luther King, but I heard him speak when he was still alive. And what a great man he was. All of those incidents and those occasions, I just feel blessed because I've sung for kings and queens, and I never dreamed, skinny colored kid from Centerville, Iowa, singing for the Nobel Prize Committee. That was a big honor. Some of these events that I participated in, I didn't even realize the magnitude of them, or the importance, because I grew up in a very humble family. And to me, all people were the same. But the older I got and the more I sang for those people, I realized how blessed I was. Because opera singers, we have Everybody has vocal folds and vocal cords. But people who sing opera, we are in a category called classical singers. Then you have popular singers like Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra. Then you have people who sing jazz music. You have people who sing for choral music. All of this great gift of music God gave us from the very beginning. In the second and third chapters in Genesis in the Bible, that's when musical instruments were first talked about. A man named Lamech, he had sons. One was skilled and talented in stringed instruments like the harp. He had another son who was talented in brass instruments like the trombone, etc. But the first voice, first music was the human voice. And all you young people, I'd like to say to you, all of you might end up being opera singers, or maybe all of you will not be opera singers. Maybe some will, but those vocal folds that God has given you, it's a miracle in your larynx, in your throat, to think that those two little vocal folds can produce the sound that opera singers have. We never use microphones. All popular singers, Broadway musical singers, I'm not saying opera singers are better, but God has given us these spatial vocal folds that our voices cut through an orchestra without amplification. And I'll tell you something else, young people. If you want to have a long career, I call it musical and vocal hygiene. You have to take good care of your voice. For example, I never have smoked. I don't drink any alcohol, not even wine, because it dries out the membranes of the throat. There's a great doctor who died many years ago that most of the singers from the Metropolitan Opera went to in New York. His name was Eugene Grabscheit. He was an old Jewish man who escaped Hitler, and he was the main voice uh, doctor in New York City in the 60s up until the middle 80s and when he died. And I remember he told me he said, Simon, if you want to have a long career, in his accent, he said, do not drink any alcohol, none whatsoever. Don't smoke. Of course, I didn't do those things anyhow. To this day, I've never drunk. And he said, and don't drink coffee. It has caffeine in it. It dries out the membranes of the throat, he said. So I had this sort of hygiene. I don't drink coffee. That's the reason I was able to sing opera up until I was 84 years of age. And I can still sing. But I didn't drink any coffee. I didn't drink black tea because it has caffeine. I drink herbal teas. So and then it's good also to have faith because the faith is what gave me a foundation to endure the injustice that I experienced and not become bitter. And so all of you who want to be opera singers, I'm just going to tell you what Eugene Grobscheid said. Don't drink any alcohol. I have sung since I was 25 years of age, and I'm 87 right now. And I believe it's because I listened to that doctor, because alcohol has nothing positive about it. They've done lots of studies, even a little bit of alcohol. Doesn't do anything. All it does is kill your brain cells.
Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. Noted. Thank you very much. So, speaking of the voice, LaShine has a question about your voice when you were younger. He says, you stated that you were a soprano as a kid and sang a high C. When did
Mhm.
your voice change? Also, have you ever sung tenor?
My voice changed my senior year in high school. Up until then, I was still singing for soprano, but I did play all the sports. I played football, basketball, track, baseball, and football practice always starts about 2 weeks before classes begin, in school. So when we had practice football, I went to choir rehearsal, went to sing, and I hardly had any voice. I hadn't sung at all during the summer because I had a job working, and the uh, choral director, Don Gunderson, in the high school couldn't believe that something happened. My voice changed so late in life because he sent me to a doctor. A doctor was not a throat specialist, it was just a general doctor. He put that little wooden thing and pushed my tongue down, looked in. He said, I have a feeling your voice is changing. And that's what happened. My voice did not change until I was 18 years of age. And so he had told me too that I could earn a living by singing, but I was singing popular music, the teacher, the voice, the choral director in Centerville High School. But when I realized that I wasn't going to be able to earn a living when my voice changed, I thought, well, I'll be a doctor. So when I went to the University of Iowa, I went in pre-med. But then my voice settled, and when it settled, when this teacher came, Charles Kellis, who discovered me out at the University of Iowa, when he told me I had a voice to sing opera, he said, what voice do you think you are? And I did say to him, I said, tenor. He said, no. He said, you're a bass baritone. I said, oh, okay. Whatever he said, that's what I said. Oh, okay. And he was the one, I really believe that God sent Charles Kellis to the University of Iowa to discover Simon Estes because I had no idea what opera was or classical music. He played some recordings for me of great opera singers, and I listened to that music. And also, he played one symphony recording of Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade. He wanted me to hear orchestral music. After I heard these great singers and this orchestral music, I said, I like that stuff. I called it stuff, and that's the honest truth. And then he's the one who arranged an audition for me to go to Juilliard School of Music. And had it not been for Charles Kellis, I wouldn't be talking with you and you young people today.
Wonderful. And you left Juilliard to pursue your career. Can you talk about that transition and were there any doubts as you left school?
Well, what I did when I went to Germany and audition, I sang for this agent, Friedrich Posch, in 1965. No, 1964, December, I sang for this agent, my girlfriend's agent, and he liked my voice. And he said, could you wait and go to Germany after the first of the year? That's January 1965. So I said, yes. And so I was still a student at Juilliard. I go to Berlin, I auditioned for them, and then they offered me this job to come to Berlin and sing The King, which later on I sang Romfus, of course, as I told you. I went back to Juilliard, and Dean Gideon Waldrop, he was the dean of the old Juilliard that was up on 125th Street, not where it is now in Lincoln Center. I came back and I was all excited. I said, oh, they've asked me to come to Germany and sing The King in Aida. And he said, well, Simon, you'll have to tell them no. I said, but I gave them my word. He said, no. He said, if you don't finish Juilliard School of Music, you'll never have a career. I was devastated. So I went to Christopher West, who was head of the opera theater within Juilliard School of Music. This is all in 1965. And he was British, but he told me the same thing. He said, you have to finish Juilliard. If you don't finish Juilliard, you'll never have a career. But I don't know. I think that God just took over. He said, young man, go east, go east. So I went back and did that. And I was still a student at Juilliard when I made my debut. But now, since then, I taught at Juilliard. And Juilliard also gave me an honorary doctorate degree just 2 years ago. In fact, I have 13 honorary doctorate degrees for various universities and colleges around the United States. I have been so incredibly blessed, and I have received lots of honors and awards. All I dedicate them to God and to my grandfather, who was a slave, and my grandmother, and of course, my mother and my father. I give them the praise and glory.
That's amazing. Katie Jeffries is asking, were there any roles that you initially struggled with but later grew to love? Also, what mindset techniques do you use to get into character before show?
You know, I feel very blessed again. I know people, I hope they never get tired of my saying I feel blessed. I didn't have inhibitions. And I think naivety sometimes can be a plus. Because, for example, when I went from Iowa to New York City, I'd never been on an airplane, et cetera, to audition at Juilliard. I wasn't nervous. And I didn't think I was overly confident. I wasn't cocky. I just went to Juilliard and I just sang to me. It's like singing in the Second Baptist Church in Centerville, Iowa, when I was a boy growing up. That's where I first sang, was in the church. And then when I sang, I just sang. And so when I went to Juilliard and audition, I just simply went there and sang for them. And when I finished singing my audition, they said, "We'd like to give you a scholarship to come to Juilliard." And this is how naive I was. I didn't realize what Juilliard was. They said, "We're going to give you a scholarship." And I said, "Oh, okay, thanks." And they looked at each other like this guy. I should have been jumping up and down, you know. I said, "Thank you." And they said, and my teacher told them I didn't have any money. They said, "We're going to get you a Rockefeller family grant also." And again, I said, "Oh, okay," just like that. And that was from the Rockefeller family. I thought it was a family maybe dealing in rocks, but it was the Rockefeller family. That's how naive I was.
Wow. So it was a good thing you didn't know the weight of what was happening, so you were free to
Yeah,
sing, just
I
enjoy
just
it.
walked out there and sang. I did. What did I know about Juilliard? Really? That's why my whole life is, I think, was prearranged before I was even born, because there's no way that Simon Estes, a mortal human being, could have done what I did, because I don't know any singer that has sung 104 except for Luciano, not Luciano, but Placido Domingo. He has sung a lot of roles, but to sing 100 with 115 orchestras, and I've sung 20 title roles in operas. That's not normal. In fact, what Dr. Anthony Yon, he's a famous throat doctor in New York, he said, "Simon, you're a freak." And I said, "I am a freak because there's no way I could have done all of that." So I tell you, I have my faith. That's what's always guided me. My faith and the way my mother and my father trained my sisters and me, always put the Lord first, lean upon the Lord, and ask Him for divine guidance. And that's what I have done. It's enabled me to help hundreds, thousands of children all around the world because God gave a talent to sing. And I tell young people, when you have these voices, all of you young people listening right now, if you're going to be a classical singer, but you can also be other singers, remember to have good vocal hygiene, as I said before, and never sing repertoire that's not good for you. Make sure you know exactly who's comfortable for you to sing. Never force your voice. Never give more than 95 to 98% of your total volume. Don't give 100% of the volume. Between 95 and 98%, as I said, don't sing any louder than that. Take care of your health, your body, your mind, your soul. Sing from your heart when you sing, not only with vocal technique, which is vitally important, but you must sing with love because you've got these special vocal folds in your throat. A piano has 88 keys. That means 88 different pitches. Just think those two little vocal folds, and they start vibrating, they can sing. Most of you can probably sing 30 different pitches. It's a possibility. 30 different pitches on those two little vocal cords because God put a miracle in your throat to be able to make that kind of sound without the use of what? Microphone. Without the use of a microphone. Remember that. You can make that sound. For example, I'll do this for you right now. La Morte. That's a classical vocal sound. That's an opera sound. But that doesn't mean that I'm better than Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, Perry Como. It's just a different type of voice. But opera singers have spatial vocal folds that you can produce that sound. And all of those pitches, remember, a violin has four strings and a bow and then the fingers, right? All of the sounds that you make when you speak and when you sing are those vocal folds. And you want to know something? When they vibrate, sometimes this is true, this is medical. They vibrate 20,000 times a second to produce this kind of sound. Get a book from Dr. Tony Yon. He's the doctor that wrote that book. just a year ago. I had that book, and he's still my doctor in New York City. He's retired. Anthony Yon's book, get his book, and it'll tell you about that. Can you imagine? Think of this. Your vocal folds are not even a half an inch, but when they vibrate as much as 20,000 times a second to produce that sound. So take care of those vocal folds.
Wow, that's amazing. And I did want to talk about your relationship with Leontine Price. So, Elliot, I'm glad you asked this question. Mr. Estes, can you speak to your 1985 Met Opera performance of Aida and what it was like to perform with Miss Price during her farewell run?
Well, I felt honored, first of all, having sung in her final performance of opera at the Metropolitan Opera House, but I sang with her before out in San Francisco in Aida also. And before I'd ever sung with Leontine Price, I called her up in New York and I said, Leontine, could I come and discuss some things about music with you and singing in opera? She said, yes, Simon, come down. So I went down and we had a long talk. And I never will forget what Leontine said to me. She said, Simon, it's going to be more difficult for you as a black man than it was for me. I said, no, Leontine. I said, you are the one who really opened the doors for all of us opera singers at the Metropolitan Opera. And she said, Simon, don't ever compromise your your faith. And she also told me, said, don't ever get bitter because she said it's going to be difficult for you being a black man. And she said, don't you ever give up. And I cannot tell you young people how much I love and adore Leontine. She's 98. She turned 98 years of age in February. And she gave me great advice. And I'll tell you something that maybe some of you young people don't know. When Leontine Price came to Juilliard, a white family from Laurel, Mississippi, that's where Leontine was born, Laurel, Mississippi and these white people sponsored her. But when she went home at Christmas time, this was in the 50s, she still had to go in the back door of those white people's house. When she opened the Metropolitan Opera in the opera Anthony and Cleopatra in 1963, a lot of people don't know this. Leontine got letters written to her and they said, Black woman, only they use the N word. They said, if you open the Metropolitan Opera House, we're going to kill you. Leontine's life was threatened, but she didn't give up and she didn't become bitter. And she
Mm,
always told me too, she said, Simon, don't become bitter. Because see, when you become bitter, you hurt your own self. It's not healthy for you. You can cry and ask God to give you the strength and courage that you need to endure. And the Bible says, God's mercy endureth forever. So he will always be there. Leontine Price, I cannot tell you how much I admire her. And there's another singer that I admire to the nth degree. Her name is Denise Graves. I
mm,
remember in Tulsa, Oklahoma, I was out there singing. I don't know what opera is in that time. And Denise said, oh, can I come sing? This was in, I don't know, maybe in the early 80s or whenever it was. And she sang, and I said, you are going to have a great career. I said, you have a great voice. And Denise Graves, I cannot tell you, young people, how blessed you are and how fortunate you are to be under her auspices because she is a great mother, a great wife, a great colleague, a, a great everything. She's a genuine prima donna.
Well, that is very kind of you, Dr. Estes. Thank you so much. But you also said to me, which I remember, you and I took a flight back east somewhere. I sang on your concert for your foundation that raises money to help young people with college, and we took a flight back to New York, and you upgraded me to first class, which oh my goodness. And you said to me in that flight, you said, uh, you know, you will probably sing the role of Carmen someday, and I'll bet you'll be a really great Carmen. You also said that to me on that flight.
Wow, I don't
How
remember that, but you were because we I
we
want you
sang
people
together.
we, We sang it together with Placido Domingo, Denise Graves, Placido Domingo, and Simon Estes sang Carmen, and Denise stole the show. Greatest Carmen. I sing with a lot of Carmens, but I want you young people to know you are blessed to be under her direction. Denise Graves is a lady with a beautiful heart, a beautiful soul, a beautiful mind, and she helps people. We're put on this earth to serve the Lord and to help one another. And I feel honored to call Denise Graves my dearest, dearest friend and
Oh,
colleague. And I love her with all of my heart.
oh, and I love you too. Thank you so much. And I love all these beautiful young people here on the screen too. Thank you. That's very kind.
That's so beautiful. And we're so glad to hear all of that in this space. And Dr. Estes, we thank you so much for your time that you spent with us. Many of the young people do need to get to class in a few minutes. Cuba had a question. I want to make sure I get that question in before everyone has to disperse. Cuba was asking, is there a role that you didn't get to do in your career that you've always wanted to do?
No, I must say really not because I've sung 104 operas and I've done, I think, about 20 title roles, and I've just been blessed to have sung all of those roles that, and I did all that I really wanted to do.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I switched to gallery view just for a moment so you can see the faces of our Shared Voices cohort who has
Uh-huh.
been with you today. We are so appreciative. They're waving their hands, they're smiling.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you.
and maybe one day they will realize how special it was and it is for us to have been able to talk to you, to spend time with you, to ask you questions. I thank you so much. I feel myself getting emotional at this moment, but just thank you so much. We do have a recording that we can watch again, so we
I
appreciate
want to
you.
interrupt and say I love all of you young people. I love you, love God, love Jesus, love music, and sing from your heart and your soul, and you'll be successful. God
Thank,
bless you all.
thank you, Dr. Estes. Take care.
Okay, bye bye.
Take